We live in a world of conveniences, and our lifestyle has been filled with things to make life easier. We're accustomed to having things expedited and made smoother. And these amenities are so plentiful that we've grown used to thinking that life isn't going to be strenuous or challenging. And the language that we use has become so in sync with that way of thinking that when we do have any bit of challenge or difficulty in doing something, the way we respond to it shows that we've grown to think that life is supposed to be smooth. Any challenge that you might have and you feel it could be done better, somebody might say, you know, there's an app for that. There's a pill for that.
Yes, sir.
Or I know a guy that could possibly fix that for you. And so it begs the question, if we look at life like that in general, when we look at our spirituality and our relationship with God, oftentimes we may approach that with the perception that things are supposed to be easier. If we could turn to Ephesians. Ephesians 1. And verse 4. Just as he chose us in him before the foundation of the world. Here it's referring to how God the Father in Christ, before the foundation of the world, saw it necessary or made a plan where they determined they would call or would arrange to have a group of people designated to be exposed to his understanding and his way of life. The word foundation, it's more apt at being translated more of a change in what the order of things were initially. It's a disruption in the establishment. That word foundation here isn't very fitting in the way it's translated. But more so, before the disruption of the way the world was at that time, before Adam and Eve had sinned, this plan was put into effect. Continuing on, that we should be holy and without blame before him in love, having predestined us to adoption as sons by Jesus Christ to himself. Again, that idea that a group of people would have been elected to be used by God. And so we find ourselves to be a part of that group. And again, as we live life, we may have that mentality that it's supposed to be easier. The same way we approach our lives and the way we have all of these comforts, be it plumbing, electricity, transportation, everything is made easier. And we think, well, why is this part of our life left out? When we look at those in the past that God has worked with, we find that this is not uncommon to ask. This is a question that oftentimes will come up, even in the people of the Bible. You look at Noah, it's believed that it took him about 120 years to build the ark. He must have been about 480 when God approached him with this. Can you imagine his mindset at that time? You have kids with the idea of going to college for years. 120 years. And I'm sure, even though it's not detailed in how, and in Noah expressing himself, he must have thought, there's got to be an easier way. Still, continuing through the Bible, you would find Abraham. He was told that he was going to have many descendants. And yet, he and his wife Sarah saw fit to use a surrogate to have a child. And in so doing, he had all his baby mama drama that started at that point. From that point on, his household was just stressful because of it. And the same way that we see men and women blend families today, that's exactly what he had going on. Because after God told him, you're going to have many descendants, And he figured, well, I'm kind of up in age, my wife is up in age, there's got to be an easier way. And that route didn't really work out.
Yeah.
When you look at Lot and his family, they were taken out of Sodom and Gomorrah. And the angels bring them out of the city and tell them to run to the mountain, save your life. And Lot responds, well, hold on now. What about that city over there? That would be easier.
Mm-hmm.
And still, the angels allowed it. And oftentimes, God might allow certain deviations in what he's doing with us. But the gist of what I'm saying is, just because it's easier doesn't mean it's better. If we could turn over to Exodus chapter 13. Exodus 13. The way God deals with us is catered to our specific person. It's catered to our character. It's catered to our sense of self. Much the same way you go to the store and you buy clothes, even if you're buying off the rack and it's not tailored, you have a specific size. You have a shoe size. You have a suit size. And that suit, that sneaker, that shoe is catered to you and whatever you're designated as. In the same way, when God deals with us, there is a certain approach that he has to take that's geared towards who we are and our development, whereby the easier method may not be the best. In Exodus 13, verse 17, here we find Israel being led out of Egypt, and they're en route to the promised land. When Pharaoh, well, they haven't exactly left Egypt yet. And incidentally, this is during the days of unleavened bread that they're making their way out. They haven't crossed that Red Sea yet. When Pharaoh finally let the people go, God did not lead them along the main road that runs through Philistine territory, even though that was the shortest route to the promised land. God said, if the people are faced with a battle, they might change their minds and return to Egypt. So God led them in a roundabout way through the wilderness toward the Red Sea. Now, I was reading from the New Living Translation, and as we see, there was an easier way that the Israelites could have taken when they left Egypt. But they didn't go the easier way. They went the longer way. They had to cross through the Red Sea. They had to be tested in the sense of seeing what God was going to do when the Egyptians changed their minds and followed them. And then, of course, you know how the story played out. There was all these other hardships that happened. But again, the thought that there was an easier way, what kind of dereliction of guidance is this? And oftentimes, we may feel that in our own lives. Even the best of them may have felt that there was an easier way. If we turn to Luke chapter 2. Luke chapter 2 and in verse 46. Here we find Jesus having been separated from his family while they were keeping the Passover in Jerusalem. And his family returned home and then recognized that he wasn't with them, and they doubled back. And when they found him, they weren't all that thrilled. In verse 46 of chapter 2, 3 days later, they finally discovered him in the temple, sitting among the religious leaders, listening to them and asking questions. All who heard him were amazed at his understanding and his answers. His parents didn't know what to think. Son, his mother said to him, why have you done this to us? Your father and I have been frantic, searching for you everywhere. Jesus replied, but why did you need to search, he asked. Didn't you know that I must be in my Father's house? Or as other translations may have, that he would be about his Father's business. So here we see he had a sense of what his role was to be, or what his role was. And if we could flip over a couple of chapters to Luke 9. in verse 22 of Luke 9, we'll see that at the age of 12 he had an understanding of his role. But once he's reached his late 20s, early 30s, that role has been given more detail if he did not know that already when he was younger. In verse 22, he says of himself, "The Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and chief priests and scribes and be killed." That is not the most enjoyable destination, but it was his lot. It was his understanding of his role to play. And of course, given that path, who wouldn't hope that there may have been an easier way? And we turn over to Luke 4, chapter 4, verse 5. We see when he was being tempted by Satan that an alternative was offered. Chapter 4, verse 5, "Then the devil, taking him up on a high mountain, showed him all the kingdoms of the world in a moment of time. And the devil said to him, 'All this authority I will give you, and their glory, for this has been delivered to me.'" This was delivered to Satan at the foundation of the world, or at that point where there was a disruption of the present system, where Adam and Eve had sinned that we spoke about earlier. Satan continues, "All this authority I will give you, and their glory, for this has been delivered to me, and I give it to whomever I wish. Therefore, if you will worship before me, all will be yours." So here now, Christ already as a child understood his role. By the time he was an adult, he understood where that role was going to take him. And it was definitely an overwhelming role. How tempting were this us with the same responsibilities it would have been to take this alternative. And you find yourself using a sense of "for the better good" notion. It's wrong. It's a deviation, but it's for the better good. I intend for something positive to come away from this, even though this is not the ideal mapped out way. In so doing, that deviation can corrupt your sense of thinking and your character development, if not at that moment, certainly in the future. And oftentimes, we don't see what corruption will take place in the future. You don't see how it's going to change you. You don't see how it's going to alter your sense of self and your gradual ultimate destination in developing God's character and being translated. So fortunately, Christ did forego that alternative. He was not carnally minded. He was not stuck in this world and thinking only of dominance and persuasion and elevation and promotion in this world, as oftentimes many of us are when we are stressed, when we are thinking there's got to be an easier way. We see other examples of an easier way in the story of Esau, when he sold his birthright for a bowl of soup. Now, for the purpose of this analogy, we're going to assume this was a really good bowl of soup. And
But he was.
I'm sure. And so he sells his birthright, the possibility of having the Messiah to be born through your bloodline, because he was really, really hungry. Again, we have to identify what's important. And so we would recognize what our destiny is, what our options really are, and what we're working with. And if we appreciate them, it makes it easier to say no to those deviations. It makes it easier to say no to those alternatives. And it makes it a little bit easier when you ask yourself, is there an easier way?
Mm-hmm.
Again, as I said, even the best of them have asked that same question. If we could turn over to Matthew 26. Matthew 26, and in verse 39, we find prior to Christ being taken captive and interrogated, he found some quiet time where he could pray, knowing, as I said, his role that was ultimately going to be played out. Verse 39, he went a little farther and fell on his face and prayed, saying, O my Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will. At that point in time, being human and dealing with the aspects of being human, I'm sure his blood pressure was up. I'm sure he was not looking forward to what he understood clearly that others didn't, what he was about to go through. He had to be going, there's got to be an easier way. As evidenced by what he said, not once, not twice, 3 times.
Sure.
He asked God the Father, come on, there's got to be an easier way. The second time, he returns after stepping away. Again, a second time in verse 42. He went away and prayed, saying, O my Father, if this cup cannot pass away from me, unless I drink it, your will be done. Again, figuratively, this was a cup he had to drink, something he had to swallow. He'd rather not even have to deal with that cup, not have to drink that. And still, not having confirmation that, okay, we could do things differently, he asked one more time. In verse 44, stepping away from his disciples, so he left them, went away again, and prayed the 3rd time, saying the same words. As I said, the way God deals with us is according to our personalities, our character. And in relation to what was happening at that point in time in Christ's life, God the Father deemed that there wasn't an easier way. Christ was able to accept that. But how difficult it is for us when it's our turn.
Mm-hmm.
It's not wrong to ask if there is an easier way. It's natural. It's a matter of whether we could stick it out if we're told that there isn't. Because the easier way may not benefit us. We could see this in 2 Corinthians chapter 12. 2 Corinthians chapter 12 and in verse 7. Here Paul is recounting how he had asked if there were an easier way to what he was going through. And because of what he was used in doing, his experiences may have been given to him to just keep him grounded. Verse 7, and lest I should be exalted above measure, Paul is saying, by the abundance of the revelations, meaning the things that he had grown to understand, the things that he would share with people, the things he was teaching, and even things that were just delegated to his understanding that had not been authorized to be released to the general public yet. A thorn in the flesh was given to me, he says of himself, a messenger of Satan to buffet me, lest I be exalted above measure. Some reason that Paul had some extreme eye problems and was making it really uncomfortable to see and function and do whatever it is that he had to do. And here he finds himself, just like Christ, asking more than once, not twice, but 3 times, come on, it's got to be an easier way. In verse 8, concerning this thing I pleaded with the Lord 3 times that it might depart from me. And he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, most gladly I will rather boast in my infirmities, that the power of Christ may rest upon me. Meaning, he found himself thankful for what he was going through.
Yes, sir.
He found himself thankful for the opportunity to even have this sense to meet this crossroad where he would experience such a thing. He was thankful for Christ's sacrifice that made it so that he was reconnected to God the Father and could be used in this way and have that understanding. And this is the same thing that will happen with us. On my job, I work with those that have been incarcerated. I work with men and women that have been in jail many times for a very, very long time. And some of these men and women come home and they experience what we just call everyday life stressors from every day. And it's overwhelming to them. And they get really frustrated. And all it takes is a subtle reminder. And I say subtle because you don't have to push very hard for them to be like, you're right. And you tell them, how many times did you dream when you were locked up about being outside and feeling the very stress that you're feeling right now? I ask them again, how many people did you leave behind in jail right now that are locked up for life, doing 20 years or more, that wish they could feel the very aggravation that you're feeling now? And immediately they bounce back and they recognize you're right. Because they recognize where they came from and where they are. We, the same, must recognize where we came from and where we're going. It changes the way we look at things when we go, there's got to be an easier way.
Amen.
And mind you, these men and women that I'm speaking of, they're not talking about horrible, giant life issues. It's new to them, so it's heavy, so it's hard. They're talking about the things we're used to. On my way here, this is what they would be saying and thinking, there was traffic. What's going on? That's normal, but not to them. It's new. I put money in the bank, and they took money out. What is this interesting? What's that about? Normal to us, but not to them. Every little small life stressor you could think of, that's what they're getting frustrated over. And when you go, there's someone else inside that would love to feel the aggravation you're feeling right now. And so, when Paul says he's thankful for his infirmities, so that the power of Christ may rest upon him, that he takes pleasure in his infirmities and the reproaches and the needs and the persecutions and the distresses, that is what he's talking about. That's the way we would think when we go, there's got to be an easier way. Even though we see that we have struggles and difficulties, still we may look at the person next to us that also is being worked with by God and go, well, they're not going through that. I want that. But again, we have to remember, all these things are tailored to who we are, not them. We turn over to John chapter 21. John chapter 21, and in verse 18. Here, Christ is talking to Peter. And the same way that Christ had the understanding of what role he would play and how his life would play out, he now is sharing with Peter how things are going to play out for him. And he says, starting in verse 18, most assuredly I say to you, when you were younger, you girded yourself and walked where you wished. But when you are old, you will stretch your hands, and another will gird you and carry you where you do not wish. Verse 19, this he spoke, referring to Christ, signifying by what death he would glorify God. Here Christ is telling Peter how his life is going to end, how he is going to be killed in the service of following God. And of course, that is not a comforting thought. Same way it wasn't comforting for Christ prior to when he was a man, before he returned to being in God's family as a spirit being. And as I said, so many times we think there's got to be an easier way. But we understand, or should come to understand, that it's tailored to who we are. But sometimes once we even understand that, we can't help but look at the guy next to us. I'm like, well, how come he doesn't have to go through this? And that's what happened here. Continuing on in verse 20, then Peter, turning around, saw the disciple whom Jesus loved following. Here comes John. John was the youngest of the 12. And there may have been a sense of kind of like an affectionate attitude from Jesus towards John because he was younger. Or maybe something about their personalities just clicked. But they were a little closer than some of the others. And everyone understood that. Peter sees John coming. And again, it recounts how he had to signal to John. You'll find out who Jesus is talking about when he said someone's going to betray me. Maybe John had that kind of insight and connection. Maybe he just happened to be closer at the table. Nonetheless, this is what Peter is thinking of and referring to when he sees John coming. Continuing in verse 20, then Peter, turning around, saw the disciple whom Jesus loved following, who also had leaned on his breast at the supper, and said, Lord, who is the one who betrays you? Peter, seeing him, said to Jesus, but Lord, what about this man? Referring to John. Again, we see others going through things. We have to remember their development is their development, and their treatment will be catered to them. Our development is our development, and our treatment will be catered to us. And Jesus reaffirmed this when he answered Peter. And verse 22, Jesus said to him, if I will that he remain till I come, what is that to you? In other words, focus on yourself, was what Jesus was telling him. And so this is what we must do. When we have our difficulties and we go, there's got to be an easier way. And even once we resolve that, the way we are going, the path we are taking is simply our past, and there may not be an easier alternative, and we begin to look at the person next to us, thinking they have the ease. Don't think that. Remember, those men and women that came home from jail, that get aggravated at traffic because it's new, they've never experienced it before. For them, it's overwhelming. For us, it's nothing, because we've exceeded that growth point. You don't know what the growth point the person next to you is on. You may overlook the growth point that you are on. Just focus on yourself. In so doing this, and accepting that there might not be an easier way, and accepting that the person next to us is on their own path as well, we have to learn to trust God. We see this in, where are we? In Corinthians 13. 1 Corinthians 13, yes. First Corinthians 13, verse 11. So it's hard to see how our life path is what's best right now. But again, we simply have to trust God. 1 Corinthians 13, verse 11. Here Paul recounts, when I was a child, I spoke as a child. I understood as a child. I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. Right. Continuing in verse 12. For now, we see in a mirror. And as you continue in what I was reading from the New King James, it doesn't seem as clear. So I will read from the New Living Translation. Continuing on in chapter 13 in verse 11. When I was a child, I spoke and thought and reasoned as a child, but when I grew up, I put away childish things. Now we see things imperfectly, like puzzling reflections in a mirror. But then we will see everything with perfect clarity. The translation in other Bibles is face to face. The New Living Translation in this instance is merely translating the meaning rather than word for word. We will reach a point in time where we will see things clearly and understand it a little bit better. Continuing on, all that I know now is partial and incomplete, but then I will know everything completely, just as God knows me completely. In the same way, we look at things and go, there's got to be an easier way. And we may not see it now. The same way our being dealt with is tailored to ourselves, because God understands you completely in a way you may not see yourself. Mm-hmm. So we see, as we live life, that it can get to a point where we say to ourselves, there's got to be an easier way. There's got to be just an alternative. And maybe there isn't. And we should accept that, thankfully, because we're thankful at the place that we're at. We're thankful that God has called us. We're thankful that we do have this opportunity. And even if we look at the person next to us, they got their own stuff to deal with. And we should be thankful that they're able to do the same as we're doing. And this is what we want. And this is what the life we would live as we look forward to what we're going to become. Romans 8, in verse 30. Romans 8, verse 30. Moreover, whom he predestined, the group of people that he saw fit that he would have to set aside. He knew there was going to be that kind of mechanism, that kind of modality. That institution would have to be made
Yes.
for people to be formed and become a part of his family. Moreover, whom he predestined, these he also called, those individuals that would fill that institution, being the church, that which we are a part of today. We are in that process where we might find ourselves asking, is there an easier way? But we know how specifically, after our contemplating it right now in this moment, how to address that, how to see it. We are those called. Moreover, whom he predestined, these he also called. Whom he called, these he also justified. Because of Christ's sacrifice, it has been made so that this path has been opened up. We can be reconnected to God. We can use God's Spirit and understanding the things that we are to understand properly. These he also justified, and whom he justified, these he also glorified. Reading it once more. Moreover, whom he predestined, these he also called. Whom he called, these he also justified. And whom he justified, these he also glorified. And this is what we all look forward to.
Amen.